Welcome, Cami community. I can't believe we're at another Cami Connect, and I'm super honored to be here again at a Cami Connect. Today is super special for me because I get to talk about project-based learning and the power of project-based learning. My two big goals today is to show you how I got started with PBL and then how it's currently going for me. And I think the starting is really important if you're new to PBL, or maybe you want to get into project-based learning, but you're not really sure where to get started. First, let me introduce myself if we've not met before. My name is Steve Martinez. I'm a social science teacher from the United States. I have my master's in curriculum and instruction with a focus in educational technology. I'm a Microsoft Innovative Educator expert, and I'm thrilled to still be a Cami hero. So first, let's talk about how we define project-based learning. And there's no real way, in my opinion, to define it or a strict way, though there's a lot of similarities depending on who you're talking to. But I like to start by just talking about what project-based learning is not. Now, I grew up in California, and if you grew up in California and you about fourth, fifth grade, it was almost like a rite of passage to learn about the Spanish missions in California. And a lot of times that involved our elementary, either fourth or fifth grade teacher having us create a replica or like a model of our mission. And so the skills that are involved with the mission that you see here might include gluing stuff on some cardboard, painting, and those are all great skills, but those skills were not really aligned to the content standards, nor were they aligned to any type of skill that is needed in the workforce then and definitely now. So the difference here between this and project-based learning is that project-based learning involves skills like inquiry, allowing students to explore various skills, and giving the students a problem or a question that they have to answer that's complex, and being a part of something that's bigger than themselves. Before I move on though, I want to point out that a lot of the work that I've done in my class and a lot of the build that I have that I'm going to share with you was really modeled and inspired by two brilliant individuals by the name of Ross Cooper and Aaron Murphy. They have written two books. This is one of them. And this book right here is really how I got my footing with project-based learning. I was doing project-based learning before this book, but once I read it, I really figured out a method that works for me and works for my students. So what is project-based learning? I feel that you need to include a series of ingredients to really get started with PBL. And the first thing is having a driving question or a wicked problem that the students solve. And students need to ask, what do we need to answer in order to solve something? And that allows students to have a level of inquiry. It allows students to explore various skills, which, by the way, I allow my students to explore the skills that they want to explore. If a student wants to podcast, I let them podcast. If a student wants to learn how to code, I teach them how to code. If a student wants to learn how to create a video, I teach them how to create a video. Because at the end of the day, the product is the product and the project is the project. But if I allow my students to learn skills that they feel they're going to need for the industry of their choice, then I should be able to provide that for them. The other thing is to allow students to problem solve and use innovation to solve something that's complex while giving the students a high level of choice and voice during the PBL experience. And also, it's really, really important for me to have students give and receive feedback that is ongoing. There's peer-to-peer feedback, there's feedback and reflection that they get from me. And then it's important, that last ingredient, for me at least, to have an intended audience. What are they trying to solve? And can they present that solution or that product to a grander audience other than their teacher? Now, to get started with PBL, I felt that I needed a formula. And not to say that I use this formula now every single time, but I do feel that having a formula in place helps ground you as a teacher and provides clarity to your students. So the first one is, again, having that big question that they need to answer or that complex problem. And then the second part of that formula is interrogating the question and picking the question apart to better understand what's being asked of them. And then third is to align the entire experience to content standards and skills. And this places the focus on the how. We know that we need to make it clear to our students what they need to learn. But the PBL process also puts a focus on the how and makes the students decide on how they're going to come up with that how. And again, a big focus on feedback and reflection. And the feedback and reflection is really what I use to grade the experience. And it's a big formative assessment that is ongoing throughout an entire unit or chapter. And then build towards a solution. And then lastly, deliver that solution to an intended audience. Now, let me just show you how I deliver the instructions or deliver the PBL expectations to a student at the beginning of a project-based learning experience. So this is an example, or this is the PBL that I use with my senior level government students in our Congress units. And so the big question that they have to solve is, how can members of Congress make themselves more accessible to their constituents? And so out of the gate, the students see that question. They then scroll down and see the description, which involves the purpose and maybe the concepts that are going to be involved in that unit. And then they see the objective and trying to provide that clarity of what's going to be included while they're trying to solve that big question. The students get familiar with the standards, and they actually need the standards and need the language of the standards in order to successfully navigate themselves through the project-based learning experience. Students are then given a pacing guide and gives them step-by-step what needs to be done. But it's important to place soft due dates and only have students focus on one item at a time as we're making our way through the experience. And that's a big part of the scaffolding piece, in my opinion, as we teach students how to do project-based learning. So let's talk about how we move through PBL. And to start out with that, let's talk about some vocab here. Let's talk about some teacher vocab. So the first thing is the umbrella question. And so the umbrella question is that big driving question that they have to answer. And we call it the umbrella question because it oversees everything else we do in that unit. So everything else in the unit, whether it's direct instruction, whether it's class discussion, think, pair, share, whatever the case is, analyzing primary sources, it all comes back and it fits under that umbrella. It all fits back to try to answer that question. And it places a high level of purpose while learning across an entire unit. And the other thing is what I call, or what we call, the progress assessment tool. And I'll show you that in a minute, but the progress assessment tool anchors the experience by aligning the entire project or the project-based learning experience to content standards, while allowing students to explore how they're going to master those standards and a place for feedback and reflection. And then lastly with this is design that product that includes solving that umbrella question and allowing students to make their own choices on how to answer that big question. So let's talk about how we scaffold this process. And so the first thing I want to talk about with this is how we interrogate the question. So let me open up this doc, and the students recognize this document called Supporting Questions. And so the students recognize that when they open this up, they know that they're going to see that umbrella question at the very top. And in my opinion, the more they see the question, the better. So let's keep on scrolling down, and now they see the umbrella question again, and really we start to interrogate the question. And this starts by doing it full group. But the more you do PBLs, the better they're gonna get at this. So the first time I do it, beginning of the year, here's the entire supporting question process, and we're gonna interrogate it together. And then over time, they can do it in smaller groups, and then towards the end of the year, they can do it on their own. But basically what they're gonna do is they're going to write their own supporting questions that they need to ask in order to better understand the umbrella question, or to even begin to answer that umbrella question. And what I do is I kind of guide them through the process of picking the question apart. And know that what I'm going to show you are real examples and real things that my students said and worked through in this particular PBL. So it reads, as I've mentioned, how can members of Congress make themselves more accessible? So a student might underline that word more and really ponder on why that word is there. And so what a student might do by using the Kami tool here is write their first supporting question and simply state or simply ask what is currently being done by Congress as it relates to accessibility. So for a lot of students, they see this, they're like, well, we want them to be more accessible, but what is currently being done? And they need to ask that to better measure that, or at least to get a better sense of how to move forward with answering that question. Now, once they have their supporting questions written, here's where things get fun. Students then go and find those answers. Now, if this is their first time doing it, I would say that you want to put strict parameters on it. So maybe they go to one place to find this truth. Over the course of time, though, you can open it up to where students, maybe if they want to go to the library to find these answers, they can. If they want to interview a stakeholder, they can also do that. If students want to search the internet, and then that provides an opportunity for me to teach them how to do that ethically, how to do that with caution in terms of what's true on the web and what's not. And it allows a high volume of inquiry to take place as they're posing their own supporting questions to better understand the umbrella question, and then trying to find truth based off the questions that they are asking. And this piece is hard because asking questions is tough. For years, students have been trained to answer questions. In my experience, students struggle with asking their own questions. But it's such an important piece for our youngsters and our youth to be able to ask their own questions and ask the right questions. So they document their findings here, they add their citations, and this is meant to be a good jumping off point into the PBL process by asking their own supporting questions. The next piece here is the progress assessment tool. And it's important to point out that sometimes I do not include rubrics in my projects. And before I get completely judged for that, let me explain my process. So the rubrics are great, and I have this highlighted right here in this document, but rubrics are great, but it turns a project into people fitting into a box of how you should learn and how I should assess you. And for years, we've taught, for years, students have been placed in these little boxes through standardized testing. And here's the information, students, and I'm going to tell you what the information is, and then you're going to go take a test. The exact same test a lot of the time. And so with project-based learning, yes, they're building a project, yes, they're using inquiry, but I use this project assessment tool as a replacement to a rubric. And what this does, it allows students, in my eyes, to create their own rubric. And so what students do is students are to write their own learning targets. So that's step one. So they're gonna write their own learning target, and they're gonna write the what. So the learning target is, what do I want to learn through this experience? And then number two is the success or the how. How are they going to see success? And how are they going to hit that learning target? And this is done in real time as they're navigating themselves through the PBL experience. And then number three here is the feedback and reflection. So while students are working through their learning targets and writing their learning targets and then incorporating their learning targets into the project, they are reflecting on their work, and it's also a space for me to provide that feedback. So it's important though, as a teacher, and it's also important to note, any administrators are in the room, that we still align this to content standards. So what I do is I link up the content standards in this doc. The students then explore their own content standards. And what I do is I have my students write a learning target per standard. And you can change this up however you want. If you want them to just focus on, let's say, 3 content standards, that's fine. If you want to include literacy standards, that's fine. If you want to include ISTE standards, that's also fine. Or maybe you want to include things that are not always content specific, like, hey, in this PBL, I actually want you to exercise the skill of market research or exercise the skill of resume building. But in this case, we have content standards, and we do have this second to last standard here that reads, describe the roles of broadcast, print, and electronic media. Students nowadays, they read that standard and it's pretty dated, but they see that language of electronic media. So what happened is that I had a student, and this is a learning target that one of my students wrote. And her learning target was like, look, my target is the role of social media during campaigning. And she wrote that target based off one of the standards. It's something that she wanted to learn. So she's using her own curiosity, her own interest to guide the learning. So instead of me telling my students what to learn, they tell me what they want to learn. And that flips everything on its head and really changes the culture of my classroom. Once the learning target has been written, they then try to think of how they're going to hit that target. And so what this student writes is, we're going to attempt to engage with our representative on social media to test their accessibility. And so they write all their learning targets, they explain the how, and then they document their feedback here. So the feedback should include, and when I say should, this is how I do it, but it's peer-to-peer. So what I do is I make sure that there's peer-to-peer feedback. So what I do is I go to the shared document icon. I have the students copy their own progress assessment tools. I model that for them. They drop that in my LMS, and that way they have access to other groups or other students' progress assessment tools. And so they go in there and they're giving each other feedback. They're then reflecting on that feedback. And the other thing is, while that's happening, I'm giving them feedback. And then also we have self-feedback and self-reflection. So while the students are working through these learning targets, they're reflecting on their learning targets, they're reflecting on the how, and they're using all of these learning targets to build a product that ultimately answers that umbrella question. So by problem solving all of that, there's a lot of reflection to be had. And what's powerful about Kami is that I can go to the comments, and then I can even drop in an audio comment where students hear my voice. And then students can also do the same thing back to me. And the reason why we may want to do that is because PBL can get messy. They're problem solving stuff. They're going deep into the content and thinking critically about, the implications of these concepts, how they're connected to the real world, and how they're connected to a larger problem. So talking it out is healthy, and it creates a good workflow. So once let's say I'm giving feedback here through this audio comment, then a student can reply there, create their own audio comment, sometimes a screen capture comment to show me, a website that they were on, what have you. And it does create a good workflow for PBL thanks to the usage of Kami. And if you are wanting to try PBL and you still want to give a test, you absolutely should do that. My students, they don't take tests. They complete this final reflection. And so the way I have this built is that, they document what went well during the experience, what struggles did they have, and they will have struggles, but it's all about overcoming those struggles. What was their level of inquiry? But then here's the most important part is I then have them copy and paste their learning targets into number 5. So however many learning targets we have, I make sure that they have enough space. And so right here, this arrow right here that I'm pointing to, this is where they paste their learning target. So LT, their learning target. So that way when I grade this, I can see what their learning target is. And the other piece here is then with this, in the green box, I'm kind of using a red color there. In this green box, then they're going to answer that learning target. They're going to explain how they hit that target, and then they're going to demonstrate their mastery. Now, notice that I say demonstrate. So if they want to write text and have kind of like a written response, they can absolutely do that. If they want to create a video comment, they can absolutely do that, screen capture comment. And what's powerful about the screen capture comment is that they can almost do like a demo of their project, or they can do a demo of some of the research or maybe the inquiry that they did, right? And so the way that they deliver that mastery to me, it's up to them. Though they have to go through all the learning targets, show me what they know, and really places a focus on they're all aligned to standards, but now they get to show that mastery on their terms, not mine. As always, I don't want to talk at you, but I want to talk with you. Please follow me on Twitter at Martinez_edtech. And I would like to have discussions with various teachers and other professionals on how we can support each other in project-based learning. Please enjoy the rest of Kami Connect. Looking forward to hearing from you, and I'm looking forward to working through project-based learning, not just at my school site, my district, but at the global scale. Thank you.